Pianist and musicologist Nicholas Slonimsky is in his 90s. The last time he played this piece was 20 years ago.
I made one mistake. I played one wrong note, but I replaced it by another note that was at least plausible. So only people who know every note of this barcarolle of Tchaikovsky would have detected it. And then I was rather careful. But I'm satisfied with my performance after 20 years. Anyway, I didn't forget any passages. So that means that I'm always self-possessed and that I am an expert faker, F-A-K-I-R maybe, or F-A-K-E-R, whichever you take. I'm 92 and a half years old, and I plan to live another 7.5 years, counting down 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Well, if there is any secret of my longevity or just going on and on, it's the fact that I don't take myself too seriously.
But for every Nicholas Slonimsky facing old age with a bright and lively mind, there are others less fortunate. Senility is a frightening prospect, but research on the aging brain and the diseases that threaten the elderly could give new hope for us all in the future. In ancient Japan, the oldest members of society were the most respected. They were the guardians of the past and stood at the gateway to life beyond the grave. Every year, each temple held a ceremony to honor the aged.
My ancestors were samurai. My father was medical doctor, clinician. Without going medical school, but studying by himself, and then take examination. And mother, she was very much respected. She was the head of the, say, Women's Association. They raised 6 children. All are sent to Tokyo for education. My wife is daughter of my teacher, and her parents, probably they liked me very much. It was a very big wedding in 1935. She was in kimono, and I was in morning dress. It was a gorgeous one in comparison with my life at that time.
Professor Tsuneo Tomita, Tom as he likes to be called, is one of my scientific heroes. In the 1960s, he made crucial discoveries that helped explain how the retina translates light into electrical impulses. At the age of 80, he's still an active member of the Japan Academy of Science. I worked in his laboratory in 1974, and I was delighted when he invited me to meet him in Kyoto so he could show me Japan through the eyes of an old man.
Colin.
Ohayou gozaimasu.
Yeah, it's very nice to see you.
How are you?
Fine.
You look very well.
Mm-hmm. How many years since?
Oh,
we
it must
saw?
be many years.
Many
We
years?
last met in the United States, I think.
Yeah.
Do you still go into the laboratory at all to work?
Yes. Just once a week.
What do you do?
And yeah, we do some experiment also.
Mm-hmm.
But besides, we have a seminar.
When the Japanese Emperor Kamayama retired in 1267, he chose this beautiful spot in Kyoto for his villa, where this Zen Buddhist temple, Nanzenji, now stands. Kamayama was only 40 when he retired here, and he was already considered an old man. Indeed, as recently as 1911, life expectancy in Japan was only about 44 for both men and women. But because of the spectacular advances in nutrition, in public health, and in medical care, the Japanese are now the longest-lived society in the world. Life expectancy of about 75 for men and more than 80 for women. In both Great Britain and Japan, at the end of the last century, less than 5% of the population lived to be 65 or over. During Tom's childhood, the average lifespan in Japan remained short. But in Britain, improvements in healthcare and nutrition increased life expectancy dramatically as the century advanced, and our proportion of elderly rose higher than Japan's. After the end of the war, when I was born, Japan began to catch up, and the proportion of old people in both countries increased rapidly. Today, the gap has almost closed. After the year 2000, 1/5 of the population in the industrialized world will be older than 65. The most rapid change will be in Japan. The paradoxical problems posed by the success of modern life in postponing death are most acute here, but the statistics are similar all over the developed world. Do we all then face what the Japanese call roshu, the ugliness of old age? In ancient Japan, the crane was the symbol of a long, happy life. In legends, they lived for 1,000 years or more. But in reality, an animal's normal lifespan seems to be written into its genes. Each species lives just long enough to reproduce and rear sufficient numbers of offspring to guarantee that the population will not decline. Small, rapidly maturing animals like the shrew live for just a few brief months. The Japanese fox lives for about 3 years. Macaque monkeys live 20 years or more because their offspring with larger brains have to spend many years learning to be independent.
This part, we have many macaque monkeys and deer because they are very well tamed.
Despite the biblical promise of 70 years and 10, widespread longevity is really a very new phenomenon among human beings. And the cruel rigors of the natural world mean that most animals don't reach the equivalent of senescence. They just die before they get old. But in a protected environment like this national park in Japan, animals can live much longer than in the wild. And in laboratories too, protected from disease and supplied with a good diet, animals can live long enough for old age to affect their behavior and their brains. The study of such geriatric animals is crucial in the scientific investigation of the aging brain. Donald Price and his colleagues are studying some of the oldest macaques in the world.
Some animals are over 30 years of age, and one would have to multiply that figure, that age, times 3 to get the human equivalent. So some of our animals are 90 to 100 years of age. And we are using this colony to try to clarify what are the kinds of behavioral deficits that occur in normal aging in primates. And then when these animals die, and we're obviously trying to keep them alive as long as possible, we hope to be able to delineate the biological basis for some of the deficits that occur in these animals.
To do this, Price administers a series of mental tests designed to detect deficits in different regions of the brain. In this test of memory, the monkey has to learn that there's a peanut under any new object in view. Young animals have no problem in switching from the object that previously concealed the peanut to a new one. But older monkeys, like Gilbert, in human terms 93 years old, often fail. The peanut is now under the flat piece of plastic on the left.
It goes back to the old object and therefore does not get the reward. So clearly that animal was impaired.
Brain damage in specific areas is known to affect performance in this test. Price suspects that the old monkeys have suffered degeneration in the frontal lobe and areas deep in the temporal lobe, the amygdala and the hippocampus.
We are looking at the consequences of aging on certain systems and certain cells in the brain. And our prediction is that if an animal can't perform this task, he has an abnormality here. And to my knowledge, this is the first chance that we've ever had to directly test that hypothesis in animals that have been not manipulated in any fashion. We're looking solely at age-associated brain abnormalities.
Price and others believe that the very skeleton of nerve cells changes with age. In addition to supporting the cell, this cytoskeleton acts as a delivery system, transporting chemical substances along the nerve fiber between the cell body and the nerve ending. With age, and particularly in degenerative diseases of the brain, the cytoskeleton becomes tangled and the vital transport system fails. Nerve cells, which can never be replaced, also start to die, especially in certain crucial regions, such as the locus ceruleus.
We know that from the brain stem in the locus coeruleus, there are pathways extending up to the brain cortex, to the front here of the brain. And these are responsible for controlling mood. Now, it's been shown that with increasing age, we may lose as many as 50% of our nerve cells from this particular region. And so an explanation then of the changes in behavior is simply that there's a deficit in the amount of chemical transmitter throughout the brain here which affects behavior.
In the normal aging brain, degeneration and death of nerve cells may be concentrated in specific regions, causing failures of memory, attention and mood. Tom seems to have escaped lightly.
I'm easygoing, and I don't pay much attention about my age. So as long as I feel that I could contribute to the society, then I would be happy to live.
Look at those calves. Pretty. But some of them are older than I am.
Really?
Mark Twain once wrote that being old is no different from being young, as long as you're sitting down. The reality of aging may not be as simple or as funny as that, but it's not all gloom either. That well-known story about hundreds of thousands of nerve cells all over the brain dying every day of our lives is probably science fiction. There are changes in the structure and the number of neurons, and in their chemistry too, especially after the age of about 75. But those people who've remained active and able well into old age, the Rebecca Wests, Pablo Picassos, Bertrand Russells of this world, are clear evidence that decline is not inevitable. The crucial question is, who will suffer and who will not?
In Japan, the official retirement age is 55, but many old people continue to work because their pensions are low. The lady porter at Kyoto Station was over 70, and her husband nearly 90. The tradition in Japan is that old people should continue to play an active role in society. Tom obviously agrees.
Very well. Do you have any kind of personal formula that you've followed?
Well, I try to keep active, both physically and mentally. I don't have any car in Japan. I walk. This is a very good exercise, physical exercise. And mentally, I am now learning computer.
You're learning to use a computer? Or?
Yeah, computer. I'm now very good applying it to my work on the diffusion of potassium in the fluid.
While Tom tackles computers, Hulda Crooks climbs mountains. In 1987, she became the oldest woman to climb the 13,000 feet of Mount Fuji.
I have climbed 97 peaks above 5,000 feet since I entered the old age category of 65. I am now 90 and a half. I never expected to last that long. I remember one elderly lady saying to me, why do you waste your strength climbing mountains? I said, I don't waste it. I gain strength. And then people will say to me, aren't you ever going to slow down? I say, what for? So old age can catch me?
But can activity and stimulation really help to keep an aging brain young? In the 1960s, researchers discovered that when young rats grow up in small, plain cages, their brains grow less, with fewer connections between nerve cells, than if they're reared in complex environments. But it was assumed that in older animals, neurons lose this potential for growth.
This rat, which is approaching middle age, has lived in a cage all of its life. It's sort of equivalent to a human that has lived in the same room or the same house without ever having a chance to get outside. What we did in a pair of experiments was to take rats like this and transfer them either at middle age or in elderly years to a complex environment, a sort of rat equivalent of Disneyland for a human being, in order to see what would happen to their brains. When we first put the old animals in the complex environment, they immediately hide under the toys, avoid any kind of interaction, and freeze. Gradually, they realize nothing bad is going to happen. They begin to explore the environment, socialize with each other. Over time, they become more active, begin to literally run around their environment, play. As this happens, you can see them beginning to push a little bit. They haven't exercised previously. They're sort of like couch potatoes that are put in the circus for the first time. And you can sort of feel these big, old, overweight rats puffing as they wander around their environment. And as time goes on, the animals actually begin to regain some of the sleekness they might have had if they were athletes when they were young. They lose weight. They become somewhat more agile, though not overwhelmingly so, and seem very subjectively, it seems like they're more alert and maybe happier, like they're really enjoying life.
Greenow wanted to know whether this experience had affected the structure of their brains. Would the connections between nerve cells, the synapses, be altered? The result of the experiment was startling. Certain regions of the rats' brains had developed up to 2,000 more synapses per neuron compared with rats kept in small cages. In the cerebellum, part of the brain responsible for the control of movement and the learning of skills, neurons in animals kept in small cages have fewer branches, whereas those from animals who've enjoyed an enriched environment have many more branches, carrying extra connections from other nerve cells.
We believe that these synapses represent the incorporation of new information into the wiring diagram of the brain, a kind of memory. I think that what we can conclude from the work at this point is that mental activity promotes good mental function. Mental exercise, like physical exercise, makes for a healthier brain.
We can't yet say that these elderly people are making their neurons grow by playing the game of gate ball, but studies in Japan have shown that social activity does increase blood flow within the brain, a sign of active nerve cells. We all hope for successful old age, doing our best to resist the natural and gentle decline of body and mind. But we also live in fear of the diseases that are particularly common in the elderly.
All over the industrialized world, younger people have been moving away from their homes, especially in rural communities, to look for education, opportunity and employment in the cities. And this has influenced the fate of older people in two ways. First of all, it's tended to break up the traditional family unit, which supports old people and gives them a useful role to play. And secondly, it's added a new risk to everyone's life, which may have its main effects when we're older: the stress of modern living.
Stress activates hormone systems that raise blood pressure Bad news for the delicate blood vessels in the brain, because prolonged high blood pressure can cause stroke, one of the commonest diseases of old age. In ancient Japan, Buddhist traditions emphasized the need for tranquility. Oishu gozaimashita. The Japanese tea ceremony has its origins in Zen Buddhist meditation, and it's hard to imagine a less stressful exercise than contemplating a teacup. But the changes in Japan that have accompanied its industrial and economic success have certainly raised the level of stress in modern Japanese life. And the elevation of blood pressure that may have been induced by that stress could have contributed to the fact that Japan has a much higher incidence of stroke than we do in the West. The traditional Japanese diet, especially in former times, may also have contributed, especially to stroke in older people. Tom took me to visit Fumio Goto, an expert on the causes of stroke.
Well, your blood pressure is 110 over 68, so you're a very lucky man. The blood pressure is rather low.
That's good news. Why does the traditional Japanese diet cause problems?
Traditional Japanese diet contains less amount of protein and less amount of fat, and yet lots of salt. And this will produce high frequency of high blood pressure.
The Japanese have always lived off the sea and use its salt to preserve their food. Add this tradition to the lean years after the war with protein in short supply, and you have a recipe for stroke. Protein deficiency produces arteries with dangerously thin walls, and salt increases the pressure they have to withstand.
If the high blood pressure continues, then the cerebral vessels becomes more and more fragile, and finally will burst.
In 1975, a burst blood vessel interrupted the career of one of America's leading dancers and choreographers, Agnes de Mille.
My gift for movement, which was, I must say, it was good. I walked with nobility and power, and I was the fleetest runner on the stage. On May 15th, 1975, I was about to give a dance concert, which consisted of a lecture and my whole company, the Agnes de Mille Heritage Dance Theater, demonstrating the history of dance in the United States. Oh, everybody in New York was coming, and it was sold out. It was marvelous. And I was sitting in the dress rehearsal, and there was a boy, one of the dancers couldn't go on. At last moment, this happened.
On the internet.
Her admission to the hospital, an X-ray scan of her brain revealed a prominent hemorrhage on the left side, in areas associated with control of movement, language, and vision. 2 months later, another scan revealed that the hemorrhage had vanished almost completely, but some of the damage was permanent.
The recovery she has is because some of the tissue was only squeezed, temporarily paralyzed, in the way that my arm might be paralyzed if you put a cuff around it so that the blood circulation didn't get to it. But part of it was, in fact, actually interrupted, the part that's left her with a hemiplegia and sensory changes on the right side. Hemiplegia means half paralyzed.
There were two difficulties and frightening sensations. One was not knowing how far the paralysis was and what it was doing to me. I couldn't feel at all on the right side of my body or the right side of my face, right? It was as though you take a chalk line and drew it down. And, I mean, just split teeth. This side no good, that side all right. And the strangest things would happen. When I ate, food fell out of my mouth, and that's this side, not this side. And the hand would do absolutely wild, outrageous things, and I couldn't control it. I also found I didn't know where it was. You know where it is?
Neurologist Fred Plum has been following Agnes de Mille's progress since the first days of her stroke.
Yeah. I don't lose it anymore because I have developed more sensitivity, I think, along the shoulder.
But what about the hand? Let me have a look at the hand.
Well, you test the hand.
Let me try a
Shall I
couple
close
things.
my eyes?
Would you? All right. Let me try.
Do
you know I have hold of it?
Well, I saw you take it, but now my eyes are closed.
Am I holding it now?
I don't know.
Am I holding it now?
Doctor, I can't tell.
Am I holding your hand?
I don't know.
Raise your hand.
How do you know you raised it?
I can feel here, and I had the impulse to raise, and it goes up when I tell it to now.
But you don't know what's up.
Well, if I was born this way, I wouldn't
Touch
know.
it with your other hand. Is that it?
No, I think that's you, but I'm not sure. Where is my hand? Oh, you had it.
Yeah, good for you. All right. Not knowing where that hand is, not knowing where that leg is, she relearned to walk and to use the hand and to function by looking at it with her eye. And she would then pass the hand and pass the leg, watching it, using her eyes, as it were, as feelers for where her body part was as she moved it.
This is the trap, and you all have to do this when you come forward. It's not an exercise of just doing jetés and raising your hand. You put pressure on the upper muscles and shoulders and press down.
Sometimes I wonder whether enthusiasm and joy in the world and interest and just plain determination doesn't form connections between nerve cells faster than nature takes them away as we grow older. That quality of hope, of drive, of walking 10 steps as if you're running the 100-yard dash, that has something to do with not only the quality of life, but I'm really confident with the length of life and the recovery from severe illness. One can will oneself to die, and one can certainly will oneself to be better.
But if a stroke is severe, the best willpower in the world can't conquer the damage in the brain. Fumio Goto is examining a new patient. Until recently, there was very little he could do to reduce the injury caused by a stroke. He could only diagnose the cause and chart the progress of any recovery. Stroke isn't always due to a burst blood vessel. Mr. Numa's problems are caused by a blood clot that has blocked an artery on one side of his brain. Now he can't speak, and Goto's tests show that he's completely paralyzed on his right side. He's unlikely to walk again and may never recover his speech. It's tragedies like this that have made scientists search for new ways to prevent and treat stroke.
This experiment is designed to know what happened in the cerebral vessel itself after stroke.
Goto's team observes the arteries on the surface of an anesthetized cat's brain through a microscope linked to a video camera. They can see the clotting that occurs after the blood flow is temporarily stopped to mimic what happens during the stroke. They've been trying to find drugs that can remove clots quickly and restore the full flow of blood. Soon after an injection of such a clot-clearing drug, the blockages begin to break up and are washed away. Presumably the drug would have to be given very quickly after a stroke.
Yes, that's right. But so far we don't know how soon we have to give this drug or not.
That could be very valuable.
Yes.
At the Hammersmith Hospital in London, Richard Frakowiak and his colleagues are using new scanning techniques to follow events in the living human brain directly after a stroke.
It seems that certainly within 4 to 12 hours, cells that are going to die have died within the brain of the human. That PET scanning has told us.
A computer generates an image of a slice through the brain seen from above. Just 9 hours after a stroke, the yellow and red regions on the right side show the massive consumption of oxygen by nerve cells surrounding the area of the stroke. 10 days later, a huge black hole shows that these activated cells have died, extending the area of damage.
The first and most obvious strategy is to try and re-establish the blood supply. But the time available for that is probably extremely short. Minutes, perhaps hours. There are other strategies which are being developed now which depend on the fact that damage may occur later on due to loss of poisons, perhaps chemicals which are normally present in the brain but are released in an uncontrolled fashion, damaging other cells around or even more distant, away from the initial site of stroke. And it seems as though we can prevent that happening by using drugs which can antagonize or counteract those particular poisons. And indeed, work in this country and elsewhere in Europe is suggesting that such agents, when given even some time after the stroke, may limit the amount of damage that has occurred. And that's an extremely promising advance, and hopefully will go on into the clinic if these results are sustained.
Tom took me to his family's graveyard in Okazaki.
Oh, really? Yes? How long have your family been buried here?
About 200 years.
Tom's mother died of a stroke, still a major problem in Japan, but now there's hope for better prevention and treatment in the future.
Yes? All of this?
Yeah, they were all magistrates in this district.
Oh, yes.
And this is my father's and mother's grave. We have a special way of communicating. We clap hand and bow, and then clap hand again. That's just the expression of our love to the deceased.
It's easy to forget the rapid improvement in life expectancy already produced by the advances in medicine. Tom's father died at the age of only 62 from pneumonia, an unusual cause of death these days in someone so young. The Japanese are fortunate in having a much lower incidence than in the West of that most feared of all diseases of the elderly, Alzheimer's disease or senile dementia. The lower rate of that disease in Japan gives hope that growing old doesn't carry an inevitable risk of Alzheimer's disease. Well then, what might be the cause?
Some water place.
Hugh has Alzheimer's disease.
The symptoms that he has are very typical for an Alzheimer patient. He has a great deal of difficulty with his memory, and that's gotten gradually worse over time. And he has trouble finding the words to say what he wants to say. He has trouble with naming, and that's also gotten gradually worse as time has progressed. And what's your memory like now? Is it as good as it used to be?
Oh, it would come back quickly.
You think that if you tried to remember a room full of names, you would be able to do it?
Yeah, I'd be able to do it, but I'd have to tune up a little bit on it, like golf or anything. You have to get going on the thing.
I have some pictures here. Maybe you can tell me what the names of them are. What about this one? Can you tell me the name of it?
Oh, that's
Yeah.
a terrific thing.
That's
right
right.
out in the bush
That's
with
right.
great big things going around, and they're going to bite people up.
Yeah, yeah. And Africa is where they live, don't
Yeah,
they?
yeah.
Yeah. Do you know what it's called? Begins with an R. Sounds like ruh.
Veronica, I can almost get it, but I can't quite get it.
Rhinoceros?
Rhinoceros,
Right,
that's it. Yeah, I got a
that's
big
right,
thing
that's
sticking
right.
out. Then I got
The gradual erosion of memory and mind that characterizes Alzheimer's disease may be due to a number of pathological changes in the brain, especially in the cerebral cortex. Inside nerve cells, tangles are seen. These are twisted filaments of the cell's skeleton. And in between the neurons lie plaques, deposits of protein called amyloid being disgorged by cells whose metabolism is out of control. Tangles and plaques exist in the brains of normal old people, but they're much more common in patients such as Hugh.
How about this one?
That's enough.
What's that called?
That's enough.
That's enough?
That's what the answer is,
Yes.
yeah.
You don't like to do these funny things. You
No,
just
I
like
don't
to
mind.
talk.
It's always
All
a good
right.
last time.
Okay.
No, I feel like a fool that I should know it. see?
No, they're hard. Not everybody can do that. It's not easy.
But I don't like to go against it because it's dull.
When it's
Anything
a little
dull.
bit hard, then you
Yeah.
don't like to do it.
It's terribly dull.
I
You
see.
see, it's good fun in the beginning, then
Yeah.
it's just a bore.
I see.
And I don't think that you're a bore.
No,
So that's the end.
Hugh is a very proud person, and he seems to want to appear as normal as possible. And so he's developed a lot of strategies for acting normal and overcoming the difficulties that he had.
Hugh has an identical twin brother, but he doesn't have the disease.
My father had Alzheimer's or some kind of a dementia, a similar dementia. Our oldest sister, Marty, has been 6 years in a home, in a nursing home in California. And I find myself, but after all, I'm 81 years old, and anybody that age has to grasp for words. I can still come up with some extraordinary words. Apparently, he has Alzheimer's and is a victim of it, and apparently, so far, I have not. And here we were born 10 minutes apart. It's devastating because Hugh has and I think this is something he senses himself, but denies it at the same time.
and that is that he's losing himself, he is losing Hugh. And this appears in his relationships, and his relationship with me goes back in a terribly deep way as a twin.
We know there's a genetic component in Alzheimer's disease, and that in some people there is a gene defect that's responsible for the disorder. But looking at twins makes it very obvious that that's not the only thing that's important. Something has to happen to trigger the onset of that genetic problem. The nature of that trigger is really going to be important for understanding what to do about Alzheimer's disease. It could be a virus infection that makes the disease come on. It could be something simple in the diet. Once we can identify that trigger, we're going to be able to prevent the onset of Alzheimer's disease. It's not a cure, it's a means of preventing the disease from ever occurring. And I'm confident that we can do that.
The genetic fault in Alzheimer's disease probably causes the proliferation of those plaques in the cortex. But they in turn may damage a chemical system that's vital for memory. In the center of the brain lies a cluster of nerve cells that send their fibers to the whole of the cerebral cortex, providing a chemical transmitter, acetylcholine, that seems to be involved in the laying down of new memories. Research on very old monkeys has shown that plaques in the cortex damage the terminals of those nerve fibers, and eventually the cells deep in the brain start to die. Fred Gage hopes that it may be possible one day to treat Alzheimer's disease by transplanting new nerve cells to replace the ones that have died, or to prevent their death by chemical treatment.
These procedures of saving cells or implanting new cells into the brain may seem like science fiction in some sense, but in fact, basic experimental research has been going on in these fields for several years now, and the facts have been established that dying cells, some dying cells, can be saved by trophic substances, and new cells can be introduced into the brain.
Trophic substances, which occur naturally in the brain, stimulate the growth of nerve cells, especially during early development. One such substance, nerve growth factor, is stored in glial cells that surround neurons. It may be released to feed them and stimulate their growth. Fred Gage thought that the power of nerve growth factor might be harnessed to save those cells deep in the brain that die in Alzheimer's disease. He cut the fibers of this group of cells, which normally causes many of them to die. But in animals whose brains were injected with nerve growth factor, this death was largely prevented.
And this is a remarkable demonstration, clearly the first demonstration in vivo that nerve growth factor is responsible for the survival of cells, and that the application or the infusion of nerve growth factor from the outside will have an effect on the survival of these neurons. One would think of a time where you could introduce nerve growth factor into patients with Alzheimer's disease and hope to prevent the subsequent death of these cells and maybe allow for some functional restoration of the patients.
It was a national holiday in Japan on the day that Tom and I visited his hometown of Okazaki. Tom took me to a ceremony that has its origins in Japan's traditional respect for the elderly.
Today is the national holiday of Japan called Keiro no Hi. It means day of respect for the aged.
For old people?
Old people.
That's a very nice idea. Well, what's happening here, Tom?
Yeah, they are given some souvenir.
Yes. They're given a gift, or?
A gift.
I see. But who gives this? Is it the local state or the government, the city, or?
Yeah, just local, not government, local city.
Yes, yes. That's very nice.
Everyone over 65 in the neighborhood seemed to have turned up, including the oldest man, aged 90, who received a special award. Tom, an honorary citizen of Okazaki, had to give a speech.
皆さん、今日の敬老の日、大変おめでとうございます。ほんのしばらく前までは、その人生わずか50年と言っておったのが、それが 男は75、女性は80以上と。で、先ほども言いましたように、急な変化が起こりますとね、そこで例えば政府の施策とかいろんなことが追いついていかない、なかなか。みんなこのゆっくりゆっくりと老齢の方が増えてくるという傾向があるんですが、日本はこうじゃなくてね、この辺は張っておったのがキューッと上がってきてるんです。急にこういう高齢な社会になった。
In As You Like It, Shakespeare described old age as the seventh age of life. Last scene of all that ends this strange eventful history is second childishness and mere oblivion, sans teeth, sans eyes, sans taste, sans everything. The Japanese also see old age as a second childhood, but more as a kind of rebirth than a mere loss of good sense. According to a Zen proverb, the supreme and perfect wisdom is knowing that in reality there is not the least thing to which one can cling. At the end of every year, the great bell outside every Buddhist temple is struck 108 times to symbolize the expulsion of the 108 passions of human life. The Japanese respect the aged partly because they believe that they've achieved a kind of enlightenment through the loss of some of those passions of life. Of course, there's also a Western tradition of respect for the enlightenment and the dispassionate judgment that old age can bring. The 17th century master, Rembrandt, captured in his self-portraits the impact of age on his face and on his own skill. The freshness and naivety of youth are slowly displaced by the passions of gathering adulthood. Before our eyes, Rembrandt's technique continues to grow in subtlety and power, long past the peak of his physical maturity. Vanities fade, and the portraits become studies of the balance between hope and reality, as nature carves deeper wrinkles in his skin. These images of a life passing evoke the distillation of experience, the struggle with self-doubt, the softening of youthful ambition. From these brushstrokes of self emerges Rembrandt's particular wisdom, punctuated just before death by his final offerings, unforgiving statements of who he was and how he had lived, physically weak but still gloriously creative.
I feel weakness of my legs and weakness of seeing, and also a decrease of my memory. Quality of life, it actually doesn't change. I just continue, but more slowly. I don't care much about my physical deterioration. I think it's a quite natural thing, and I just follow the nature.
Tom believes wisdom is vital for our survival. He'd kept a secret until the end of our journey.
Now we are at the top of the mountain. You see Hiroshima very well from here. Yes. And I don't know whether you know or not, I actually observed the atomic bomb blast.
You were here?
Here.
So you saw the bomb?
I saw the bomb. We were taking breakfast, and we saw the brisk flash of light. And then we went to the window and saw this mushroom-like clouds billowing up. And those mountains were started moving. And that kind of moving was toward us. And when that moving was just engulfed us, I had a very strong shock. That's the effect of blast.
How long was it before survivors came away from the city?
About 2 hours. They just came running with their face badly burned.
And as a army doctor, I took care. I tried anyhow care of them. I'm actually a very lucky man. My family thought I was dead at that time. And actually my life after that is my second life. This is just the, what do you say, present from heaven.
Tom, do you think we're going to be able to avoid catastrophes like that in Hiroshima in the future?
I think so. But for that, we need wisdom.
Well, that's true. Perhaps we need the wisdom of old age.
Mm-hmm. The experiences of long life do produce a better understanding.
Do you feel that you've been able to make decisions more easily as you've got older, Tom?
I become more cautious in making decisions.
Here on the sacred island of Miyajima, by tradition, no one was allowed to give birth or to die. There's still no cemetery on the island. It's a place of continuous life. We might all dream of living forever, but not all of us will live into our 80s, let alone to be as active and as alert as my friend Professor Tomita. But we can hope that our advancing knowledge of the aging brain will enable us to conquer those terrible diseases of old age and to encourage and exploit the special talents and wisdom of the elderly. George Bernard Shaw once wrote, "Men do not live long enough. They are, for all purposes of higher civilization, mere children when they die." If we're to avoid a social catastrophe, we must regain the respect that Shaw had for the aged, for we shall be them one day.
If you'd like information about organisations that provide help for people suffering from a stroke or Alzheimer's disease,